Montana, 1887. She said it on a Wednesday morning in late September, standing at the counter of her father's post office, sorting letters with the kind of unhurried precision that made even small tasks look like something worth watching. He hadn't meant to say it. He had come in for a parcel and a pound of nails, the way he did every week, and somehow the words had come out the way honest things sometimes do before good sense could catch them and pull them back. You know, Nora, any man in this county would count himself fortunate just to have you look his way. He had expected her to wave it off. A small laugh, a modest shake of her head, the kind of easy deflection that lets two people move past an awkward moment without either of them having to be brave about it. Instead, she went still. Her hands stopped moving over the letters. Something shifted in her face. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just a quiet change, like the light shifting when a cloud moves off the sun. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her eyes held an expression he had never seen on her before. Careful, hopeful, decided. "James Whitmore," she said, very quietly. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for you to notice." Nora Aldridge was 22 years old, the eldest daughter of Robert Aldridge, who ran the only post office and dry goods store in the town of Burnt Creek, Montana. It was not a remarkable town by any measure. 400 and some people, 2 churches, 1 saloon that the churches officially disapproved of and privately depended on for gossip, and a main street that turned to mud every spring and dust every summer with the reliability of the seasons themselves. But Nora Aldridge was remarkable, though she would have been the last person in Burnt Creek to say so. She had grown up behind that post office counter, sorting letters before she was tall enough to see over it, learning every family's name and history through the correspondence that passed through her hands. She knew who was writing to whom, who owed money to strangers in other states, who had a sister in Georgia they hadn't mentioned to the neighbors. She kept all of it to herself, with the quiet discretion of someone who understood that other people's stories were not hers to tell. She was dark-haired, with her mother's sharp green eyes and her father's patience, the kind of patience that wasn't passive, that had edges to it. That was a choice made deliberately every morning. She could read faster than anyone in the county, mend a saddle with competent hands, bake a pie that had won the county fair twice, and carry on a conversation that made you feel, afterward, that you had said something smarter than you actually had. She was also, for reasons that bewildered everyone who knew her, unmarried. James Whitmore was 27, a carpenter and part-time farrier who had come to Burnt Creek 4 years ago from a town in Wyoming. He never talked about much. He had a workshop on the edge of town, a small house he had built himself, and a reputation for work so careful and precise that men rode in from neighboring counties to hire him. He was not a man of many words, but the words he chose were always the right ones, which counted for more. He had started coming into the Aldridge store regularly in his 2nd year in Burnt Creek. At first, it was just supply runs, nails, rope, turpentine. Then, he started arriving a little slower, staying a few minutes longer than necessary, finding reasons to ask Nora questions he probably already knew the answers to, about shipping times and parcel weights, and whether the new catalog had come in yet. He had not, until that particular autumn, understood what he was doing. The summer before everything changed, Burnt Creek held its annual harvest social at the Callaway farm, which was large enough to accommodate half the territory if the weather held. It was the kind of event that nobody admitted to looking forward to, but everyone attended. Good music, good food, and the particular relief of a hard summer's work giving way to something that felt, briefly, like rest. Nora arrived with her father and her younger sister Celia, who was 16 and already conducting herself with a confidence that made Nora feel quietly ancient. She wore a green dress that her mother had made the year before, dying of a fever in the winter of '85, simple cotton, a little worn at the hem, but the color was good against her dark hair, and she knew it. She helped set up the dessert table. She talked with the Callaway daughters. She danced twice with the minister's son, who was pleasant and dull in equal measure. James Whitmore stood across the room with a cup in his hand and watched her with an expression that anyone else in the room would have described as transparent. Nora's friend Delia Marsh, who had sharp eyes and no patience for obtuseness, walked up beside him, looked at Nora, looked at him, and said flatly, "You've been staring at her all evening." "I haven't been staring," he said. "James." Delia was a woman who used names the way other people used periods to mark the end of an argument. My grandmother could see it from the porch, and she hasn't had good eyes in 15 years. He changed the subject. He was good at that. But walking home that night, alone on the road between the Callaway farm and his workshop, with the September stars enormous overhead and the smell of hay and wood smoke in the cooling air, he stopped. He had stopped because he had been thinking about something Nora had said at the dessert table, something small, a dry observation about the minister's son that she had offered in passing, just loud enough for him to hear, and he was laughing again. Alone on a dark road, at something she had said 2 hours ago. And he stood there and thought about that honestly, the way a man does when there is nobody watching. Nora Aldridge, who sorted letters with her eyes closed practically, who had once talked a traveling merchant down to fair pricing with nothing but a polite tone and the implication that she had better offers, who read every book that came through the store before sending it on, and somehow never seemed to consider that remarkable. He started walking again. He walked past the fork that led to his house and stood at the edge of town for a while in the dark, feeling like a man who had just read the last page of something and realized it had been the best thing he'd ever read, and he hadn't been paying attention. October arrived the way it does in Montana, fast and cold and indifferent to anyone who wasn't ready for it. The aspens went yellow overnight. The mornings had frost on the water troughs by 6. Work slowed for most of the county, but James had a backlog of cabinet orders that kept him in his shop until dark most days. He started finding reasons to stop by the post office, not just for supplies, though he always bought something, a packet of letters, a tin of something, a length of rope he didn't need yet. He would stay 10 minutes, sometimes 15. Nora never seemed to mind. She talked with him the way she talked with everyone, directly and without performance, but he noticed she laughed more with him than with others. He noticed she remembered things he had mentioned weeks earlier and asked him about them casually, as if she had just thought of it, as if she hadn't been holding on to the detail. He noticed these things. He did not, yet, know what to do with them. One afternoon in late October, old Walt Greer, who was 80 years old and had earned the right to say whatever he pleased, was sitting in his usual chair by the door when James came in. He watched James spend 12 minutes buying a single postage stamp. When James finally left, Walt looked at Nora over his glasses. "Child," he said, "that man is in here 4 times a week. He sends a lot of letters," Nora said, without looking up from the parcel she was wrapping. "Nora Jane Aldridge," Walt said, with the absolute authority of a man who had lived through 3 wars and 2 wives. "He has mailed exactly 1 letter in this store in the past 2 months. I counted." Nora went slightly pink. She found something urgent to reorganize on the shelf behind her. Walt made a sound that was part approval, part exasperation, and returned to his newspaper. It was her father, of all people, who said the thing that landed differently. Robert Aldridge was a man of deliberate silences and careful observations, and one evening in November, when James had just left, after what was supposed to be a quick stop for nails, but had turned into 40 minutes of conversation about whether the new railway line would reach Burnt Creek by spring, her father came out of the back room, set down his ledger book, and looked at her directly. "He's a good man," Robert said. "He is," Nora agreed. "Steady, honest, makes things built to last." Her father paused in a way that made it clear he was choosing his next words with the care he gave to everything. "He comes in here more than any man in this county needs to for actual supplies." Nora lined up a row of stamp books that did not need lining up. "I'm aware of that, Papa." "Are you?" It was not quite a question. She looked at him then. Robert Aldridge was watching her with the expression he used when he already knew the answer and was simply offering her the courtesy of arriving at it herself. "I'm waiting," she said, quietly. "I know you are," he said. "I just want to make sure you know what you're waiting for. A man worth waiting on is one thing. Waiting past the point where you should have said something, that's another." He picked up his ledger and went back to the storeroom. Nora stood at the counter for a long time after he was gone, her hands flat on the wood, thinking. She had been patient. She had always been patient. It was a quality she had been told all her life to be grateful for, and she was, mostly, except that patience left entirely on its own could look a great deal like silence. And silence, she was beginning to understand, was not the same thing as waiting. Silence was just the absence of courage. She thought about that for 3 days. What happened in early December was not what she had planned, because she had not planned anything. She had only decided quietly, the way she made most of her real decisions, without announcement, that she would stop helping him not see her. She stopped being merely pleasant. She was not unkind, she was never unkind, but she stopped softening herself into a shape that was easy to overlook. When she had something to say, she said it. When she disagreed, she disagreed. When he said something that made her laugh, she let herself laugh fully and didn't turn away to hide it. She looked at him directly. He noticed. She could see him noticing. It was visible in the way a man shows things. He thinks he's hiding a pause just a beat too long, a glance that came back when it should have gone somewhere else. Something was shifting in him. She could see it the way you can see weather coming from a long way off on the Montana flats. She waited. But she waited on her own terms now, with her eyes open. The Wednesday morning it happened was cold and clear, with the first real snow of the season on the peaks to the north and a sharp wind coming down off them. James came in just before 10. He said he needed a parcel picked up. He got his parcel. He stayed. They talked about the railway, about the Haskell family, who were selling their property and moving to Oregon, about whether the hard winter the old-timers were predicting would actually arrive. James was leaning against the counter, with his arms folded the way he did when he had something on his mind that he hadn't organized into words yet. Nora was sorting the morning mail. She had learned, over months of observation, that the letters which came in on Wednesdays were the most interesting, more personal, more urgent, written over weekends when people finally had time to say what they meant. She was thinking about this idly when James said it. "You know, Nora, any man in this county would count himself fortunate just to have you look his way." He had said it easily, the way you say something you mean purely as an observation, the way you comment on the weather or the price of lumber. He was looking at the window when he said it, not at her, which was how she knew he hadn't planned it. Planned things, with James Whitmore, always came with eye contact. The unplanned ones came sideways. She went still. Her hands stopped on the letters. She was aware of the fire in the stove, the wind outside the window, the sound of horses on the street. She was aware of him, 3 feet away, waiting for her to laugh it off the way she had laughed off smaller things before. She did not laugh it off. She looked up at him and said, quietly and clearly, the thing she had been carrying for the better part of 2 years. "James Whitmore, you have no idea how long I've been waiting for you to notice." He went still the way she had gone still. The color that moved into his face was slow and visible, and she watched it without looking away, because she had said what she meant and she intended to let it land. The creek kept moving. The fire kept burning. Wind moved past the window. James unfolded his arms and stood up straight. His expression had changed into something she had not seen on him before, a kind of startled openness, as if a door he hadn't known was there had swung toward him without warning. "Nora," he said. "Yes," she said. She was still holding a letter from someone in Ohio. She set it down carefully. "I meant what I said." "I know you did," she said. "That's why I said what I said." She looked at him steadily. "I've been watching you come in here for better part of 2 years and find reasons to stay 20 minutes longer than you needed to. I have thought about you a great deal more than is probably dignified to admit, and I have been waiting for you to get around to it." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face broke open into what she recognized, with some surprise, as relief, as if he had been carrying something heavy and had just been given permission to set it down. "I'm sorry it took me so long," he said. She considered him. "You got here," she said. "That's what matters." He laughed. Then a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, and she realized she had never heard him laugh exactly like that before, without reservation, without pulling it back. "May I come calling on you properly?" he said. "I'd like to speak with your father." She glanced toward the back room, where the sound of Robert Aldridge and his ledger had been conspicuously quiet for the past 5 minutes. "He can hear everything from back there," she said. "He's been hoping you'd get around to it for about a year." From the back room, without any preamble, her father said, "Supper's at 6:30, James. You're welcome to join us." Nora looked at James. James looked at the door to the back room. Then he looked back at her, and there was something in his expression that was entirely new, warm, and a little sheepish, and entirely certain all at once. 6:30, he said. 6:30, she agreed. He picked up his parcel and left. Nora stood at the counter for a full minute after the door closed, looking at the Ohio letter she had set down, feeling something she recognized after a moment as the absence of waiting. Whatever she had been holding in reserve all this time, quietly, without making a production of it, she could put it down now. It had turned into something else. He came to supper that Wednesday, and Thursday, and most evenings the week after. Her father approved, which Nora had expected. Celia approved loudly and immediately, which Nora had also expected. Old Walt Greer, when he heard, said only, "About time," which summarized the general sentiment of most of Burnt Creek. The courtship moved at the pace of two people who had real work to do and were not interested in performing for an audience. It happened in the edges of ordinary days. Walks at the end of the week when the shop was closed, Sunday afternoons at the Aldridge table, evenings in the back room of the store where James had taken to fixing small things that had needed fixing for years. A drawer that stuck, a window latch that didn't catch, a loose board in the floor that Nora had been stepping over since she was 10. She noticed the fixing. She said nothing about it for 2 weeks. Then one evening she watched him quietly replace a door hinge that had been squeaking since summer and said, "You don't have to do all this." He set down his screwdriver. "I know," he said. "I want to." She recognized the words. They were hers, the ones she had said to herself, privately, every time she had done something kind for someone who hadn't asked for it and hadn't noticed. "I know. I want to." It was not obligation. It was not performance. It was just what you did when you cared about something. She looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has just been understood without having to explain themselves. "All right then," she said, and handed him the level. December brought real winter, the kind that meant business. Snow on the ground by the second week, cold enough to make the morning air feel like something solid. James's workshop stayed busy despite the weather. There was always something to build, something to mend, and the long indoor hours of winter brought him more cabinet and furniture orders than the summer had. But there was one evening in mid-December that he never told Nora about. Not for years. He was walking toward the Aldridge store for supper, and he stopped in the middle of the street, in the cold, for no reason he could have named. The store windows were lit, orange against the early dark, and he could see Nora's silhouette moving inside, and the smell of wood smoke was coming from the chimney and carrying warmth with it even out here in the cold. He stood in the street and felt something so complete and so enormous that it frightened him. Not because anything was wrong, because everything was exactly right. And he had spent a long time being careful about things that were exactly right. Because things that were exactly right could become things you couldn't survive losing, and he had already lost things he hadn't survived easily. He stood in the cold for 8 minutes by his own count, feeling the fear of it, letting it be real. Then he walked forward. Because she was in there, and supper was in there, and the life he had been building in this town for 4 years had been, he understood now. Standing in the cold Montana dark, unconsciously aimed at this specific window, on this specific street, without his ever quite knowing it. And it seemed deeply unreasonable to have gotten this close and turn away from it now. He knocked. She opened the door before he finished knocking. She always heard him coming across the frozen street and said, "You're late. The stew's been ready for 20 minutes. He stepped inside into the warmth and the smell of supper and looked at her and thought, "This is what I almost walked away from in the cold." He didn't say it. He hung up his coat and sat down at the table and was grateful with the whole weight of his body. He asked her in January, in the store, because that was where the true things had happened between them, and it seemed wrong to dress it up somewhere else. Her father and Celia had, with theatrical casualness, found reasons to be elsewhere. The store was quiet in the mid-morning, the light pale and clean through the front window, a thin coat of snow on the street outside. Nora was doing inventory. She was always doing inventory when she was pretending not to be waiting for something. James came in and set a small object on the counter between them. A ring, simple gold, with a small green stone the same color as her eyes. Not an accident, she understood immediately. He had thought about that. He stood across the counter from her and said what he meant, plainly, the way she had always preferred. "I know I was slow," he said. "I know I came in here for the better part of 2 years and let you do the noticing while I pretended I was just buying nails. I know you were patient longer than you should have had to be, and I am not going to ask you to be patient anymore." He paused. He had never been a man who wasted words, but he gave this the time it deserved. I want to be the man who sees you clearly, every day. I want to build something with you that is built right, built to last, the way things last when they're made honestly. He looked at her steadily. I would very much like it if you would marry me, Nora Aldridge. She looked at the ring on the counter between them. She looked at him. The expression on her face was not the one she wore for the rest of the town, the composed and capable expression of the postmaster's daughter who had everything managed. This was something private and entirely unguarded, the face she kept for the things that mattered so much she couldn't perform around them. James Henry Whitmore, she said, you have a great deal of ground to make up. He did not move. Is that a yes? She picked up the ring from the counter and held it in her palm and looked at it for a moment with the expression of a woman who is not looking at a ring, but at the life it represents. That is absolutely a yes, she said. He came around the counter. He put his mother's ring on her finger there in the Aldridge post office with the snow outside and the morning quiet around them, and she held his hand in both of hers, the way you hold something you intend to keep. And he kissed her for the first time, and from the back room her father made no sound at all, which was his version of great rejoicing. The wedding was on a Saturday in April, when the last of the winter mud had dried, and the hills above Burnt Creek had gone green. Half the town came, which meant all of the town came, because in a place that size the distinction is meaningless. Nora wore her mother's dress, taken in and altered by her own hands over the long winter evenings when she'd had something to do with the waiting. Ivory cotton, careful stitching at the sleeves and collar, nothing elaborate. She walked down to James with her father's arm under hers and her face clear and certain, and James looked at her the way she had been waiting for him to look at her, not as a pleasant neighbor, not as a woman behind a counter, but as someone seen fully, entirely, with nothing left out. They said their vows. Robert Aldridge's voice, reading them in, was steady until the last line, and then it was not, and half the town looked at their boots politely for a moment. Celia cried the open and uncomplicated tears of someone who had been invested in this outcome for a long time. Old Walt Greer, sitting in the back row, said, finally audibly, and then looked unrepentant when people turned around. They danced on the grass outside the church until the sun went behind the mountains. Then the town went home and left them to the life they had made. The years that followed were not simple, because nothing in Montana in those decades was simple. Winters were hard. The cattle sickness of '89 cost them 2/3 of the small herd they'd begun. There were years when the money was tight enough that they counted every dollar twice before spending it once. But there was also this. Nora kept the store's accounts because she was better with numbers than anyone in the county, and she knew it, and James knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. She organized a cooperative among the women of Burnt Creek for sharing supplies and equipment through the hard seasons, a practical system she had sketched out in a letter to her aunt and then built in 3 months, without fanfare, and which people were still using 20 years later. James built the new schoolhouse and the Harker barn and the frame of the county's first real hotel, and every one of them was built the way he built everything, square, solid, made to last longer than the reason that had called for it. Their first child was born in the spring of their second year, a girl they named Eliza, who arrived with a quantity of dark hair and an immediate and vivid personality, and who, from the first moment she could form an opinion, directed it at everyone around her with cheerful authority. James said she took after Nora. Nora said she took after James. The truth, as it usually is, was both. A boy came 2 years after that. Thomas, for James's father. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's careful silence, and the combination made him, from earliest childhood, the most trusted person in any room. On a Wednesday morning in the autumn of their 5th year, Nora was behind the counter, sorting the morning mail the way she had sorted it every Wednesday morning for as long as she could remember, when the door opened and James came in with Eliza on his shoulders and Thomas toddling behind him with the absolute focused determination of a 3-year-old who has decided to walk himself and will not be carried. She looked up and raised her hand. James came to the counter. Eliza demanded to be given something interesting. Thomas arrived at the counter and put his hands on it and looked up at his mother with enormous gravity, as if he had important business. She lifted him up and settled him on her hip. James leaned on the counter. For a moment they were just there, the four of them, in the store that had been her whole world before it became theirs. With the morning light through the front window and the smell of wood smoke and paper, and the particular quiet of a place where everything is in its right order. "I've been thinking about that first winter," Nora said. "Have you?" "That Wednesday morning, what you said." She didn't look at him immediately. Any man in this county would count himself fortunate. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You said you'd been waiting for me to notice." "I had been," she said, "for a very long time. I'm sorry it took me so long." She looked at him. Thomas put his hand flat on her cheek with the frank, assessing touch of small children, as if checking that she was real. She held his wrist gently and kept her eyes on James. "You got here," she said. "That's what I told you then." "You were right," he said. "I was," she agreed. "I usually am." He laughed. She smiled at him over Thomas's head, the small, direct smile that she gave to the things that mattered most to her and nowhere else. Outside the window, Burnt Creek was going about its Wednesday business. The mountains to the north were already carrying their first real snow of the season. The street had the particular golden light of autumn mornings in Montana, clear and cold and brief, the kind of light that reminds you to look at things directly, because it will not last. Nora Aldridge Whitmore stood behind the counter of her father's store with her son on her hip and her husband across from her and looked at the light on the street and understood, with the full weight of a woman who knows what things cost, what she had almost let herself miss. She had been patient. She had been honest when patience finally ran up against its limit. She had said the true thing out loud on a cold Wednesday morning and let it land and not taken it back. And from that one moment, everything else had followed the ring. The house, the children, the ordinary days that were, she understood now, not ordinary at all. The greatest things in life are rarely hidden from us. They are usually right there. Across the counter, coming through the door on a Wednesday morning with a parcel and a reason to stay 20 minutes longer than necessary. Right there, waiting for us to stop pretending we haven't noticed, to stop hiding our patience behind the appearance of not caring, to say the true thing out loud even when our voice is quiet and our hands are not entirely steady. Nora said it. And it changed everything. Don't keep the true thing to yourself until it's too late to say it. Thank you for being here today. Wherever you are, I'm glad you stayed. Until next time. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't a grand gesture. It's simply saying the true thing out loud when you've been carrying it quietly for too long. Nora didn't wait to be rescued. She chose honesty at exactly the right moment, and that one small act of courage opened into a whole life. If there's someone you've been seeing clearly but haven't said so yet, today is a perfectly good Wednesday. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted for your entertainment and to share a little warmth, with the hope that the lesson it carries finds its way into something real in your life.